So Unit 15 that we're getting started with today is called Post-War America. As you know, we just finished up with World War II, and we were left with some major questions. How is the world going to be able to recover? What is the U.S. going to be able to do to help shape the new world that we are going to be living in? We're going to take a look at things like the Cold War, the Korean War, Vietnam, as well as some struggles on the home front, like the fight for civil rights. And all of this is going to be taking place over 7 lessons in this unit. I know last time we only had 4. This one's 7, so just keep that in mind as we're going for the sake of pacing. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and move on to our first slide here. So our overarching question that we always deal with one big question, and we've dealt with in different ways, whether it's writing essays or just discussing it in different and questions. But our question this time is, what is America's role in the world? So we've talked about in previous chapters how the United States has gone from an isolationist country to sort of the world police intervening all over, especially Central America, back to isolationist after World War I, where they kind of tried to separate themselves from the chaos going on in Europe, and then again getting heavily involved in World War II. So now we're going to be looking at the United States from 1945 closer to present day. So what is America's role? Is it America's job to get involved in all these different crises across the globe? If there are people getting abused and mistreated in different countries, is it the United States' job to step in and prevent that from happening? Or should the United States, again, focus on itself first and kind of let everybody else do what they need to? So by the end of the World War II, the United States become the world's most powerful country. How would America use this new strength and influence? We're going to take a look at what the United States and some of the presidents that followed, Truman, Eisenhower, and so on, what they felt the United States job was and how they got involved. So let's say this was a normal week, like next week. I might ask you guys to write 3 sentences on that prompt and include it in your assignment, your whatever assignment that we have for this week. Hey, I'm seeing a lot of people who are joining in. I appreciate you guys all sending those messages. Remember, if you have any questions, just go ahead and ask them there. So we're going to watch our intro video like we normally do. Since Twitch is super great, it allows me to just switch over to tabs really quickly and actually play this full video. So I'll mute myself so there's not a weird echo. If you have any questions, just feel free to post.
Gabe Gold-Hodgkin. I'm 17 years old and I'm from Massachusetts. I'm on Sojourn to the Past right now, which is a journey through the sites of the civil rights movement where we meet with important figures from the movement, learn about our history.
My name is Ariana Cavanis. I am 17 years old and from California. I had no idea what really happened during the civil rights movement. Like during class, we would just go quickly over it, but there was no actual detail to it, and that kind of upset me, and I really wanted to know more.
We're in Little Rock, Arkansas, right by Central High School, which is where the Little Rock 9, where these 9 children came to integrate a segregated high school. Minnie Jean Brown Trickey is one of the Little Rock 9. She's a really powerful person, really strong. She's been with us for a lot of the trip, and we've been able to talk to her, ask her questions, and it's been really amazing to know personally somebody who's a really key historical figure.
Before desegregation of schools was a law, what was it like at your school with all Black students?
It's crazy because half the 9 walked past this school to get to the Black school, right? So for me, the reason that I thought desegregation would be good would be kind of a sharing of resources. Central had good science labs, lots of equipment, and if you look, they have a stadium, for goodness sake. So, I think people misunderstand the nature of desegregation, and it's always been about resources.
Federal troops led 9 Black youngsters to class at Central High School. For the first time since the Civil War era, federal troops were sent to a southern city to enforce the law.
A couple of weeks earlier, state militia had barred the Negroes from the school.
The first day getting turned away. The second time, after almost 3 weeks, the mob had grown really huge. And even though we went into class, we were pulled out, put in a police car, and driver being told, once you start, don't stop. And he's white-knuckled, but he's got a gun on his hip, you know, I mean, so very scary. Every day, you kind of say, well, after that, anything is possible, and that just kept happening. You kind of say, well, it can't get any worse. Nobody knew how to do this. It was new, and it was new every day. The thought that some people might have been accepting, I know that there were. I mean, we're living the same kind of thing where a small group of people can make everybody crazy. It didn't feel safe, and we had to carry our books because things would happen to our books. They would pee in the locker or open it and, you know, throw your homework away. So we're always carrying our books. So there were just inconvenient things that made it even worse. But it was constant terror. It didn't end at the school day. After hours, I mean, the calls and the coming by the house throwing rocks.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of how you carried over the activism of Little Rock into the rest of your life, sort of?
Well, you know, we were very fortunate, I think. We were in '57, and what they call the '60s civil rights movement just burst out. And so many, as John Lewis and other people say, that the Little Rock Nine inspired them. And we got letters from every place in the world. So it was inspirational. So we do feel a certain pride that those images were inspirational to people. When we unveiled them, we just started crying and hugging each other. What I enjoy most about Sojourn to the Past is watching young people transform because they are informed. A lot of the civil rights movement was about young people. They didn't know this, so they didn't know what their potential could be. And I watched them transform and become indignant about what they hadn't learned. I've done this for 12 years, I guess, and it's inspirational to me. So I transform every trip as well. It's a reciprocal relationship where we are sharing information, and I love watching them transform. Don't be silent, don't be afraid. Ordinary people do extraordinary things. Little Rock Nine!
Hope you guys got to enjoy that video and taking a look at some of the figures in the civil rights movement that we are going to be exploring throughout this. Okay, Mom just texted me. Yes, I see that. Yes, they can only send emojis. That's the point. There's another chat room we have set up because technically anybody can go on there, and I don't know who every username is, so that's why we are we have it set up like that. Okay. If you need to talk to me, Miss Musgrove, you can text me. But anyway, sorry about that. I thank you guys for the people who just arrived. I see your messages in the Google chat. I appreciate that. So our first lesson in this unit is the beginning of the Cold War. Can anybody tell me where, based on your knowledge of history, can anybody think where that picture there was taken? I'll look at your comments, see if anybody can figure that out. So U.S. Army checkpoint, we're leaving the American sector. A whole bunch of different languages there. What do you think that means? Checkpoint Charlie, says William. Hold on, that was. So can you tell Berlin? Good. So yeah, Checkpoint Charlie. Let's see if I can pull up something. Hold on, guys. So absolutely, it's the best known crossing point between um, East and West Berlin. We're going to talk a little bit about Berlin Wall either today or on Friday. But well done. Yeah, we're going to take a look at how the United States and the USSR start to go head to head during this Cold War period. How they have disagreed. They have ideological disagreements, and how that kind of shapes to engulf the entire world, and how that it shapes even how we look at some different countries to this day, and these cold wars. These, yes, Kate, you're not wrong. About how that changed politics we have even to this day. So during World War II, the US and the USSR worked closely together, but even before the end, new tensions began to surface. We talked a little bit about this in previous units, how the USSR had taken active steps across the globe to promote communism in different ways and to try and incite these revolutions in a lot of these financially struggling countries. Those are the countries that they would really focus on because they're the ones that already have a lot of unrest. There are a lot of people who are not happy with the way that things are going financially, and they're looking for a big change. So those were those countries that they focused on, and the U.S. kind of took note of that. And this ideological difference was pretty strong between the two countries, even to this day. Obviously, communism has an extremely bad connotation, or this you think very, very poorly of communism even to today in the United States. And the communist government in the USSR challenged two things which the US held dear: religion and private property. So this idea that you can own everything yourself, you have your house, your land, which is yours, and nobody can do anything to change that. If they want to, even construct anything in your area, they have to ask for your permission. That is the general idea behind private property in the United States to this day. And by 1948, communists controlled the government of every Eastern European country, and these countries became satellite nations of the USSR. We're going to take a look at a map and just how widespread their reach was. But we remember at the beginning of World War II, they invaded some of those Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, taking complete control of those and taken half of Poland. They worked together with Germany at first, but even after they had, fought and been on opposing sides, they still held that influence over much of Eastern Europe. And the United States and Britain, other democratic countries saw this big issue coming. And Winston Churchill has this famous speech where he coined this the Iron Curtain, as we say here, from Stettin to the Baltic and Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. So again, if you're taking notes as we should, that's something you should be writing down here. This Iron Curtain speech basically brought attention to the rest of the world exactly the threat that the USSR was at this time, how they were continuing to spread influence, and how they were worried that they were going to continue to spread to countries like the US or the UK or France, on and on. And if this communist ideal could be a world power taking over the majority of the world, at least that's what they were afraid of. And that's where that speech comes from. So can I go on, or is there anybody who's still taking notes on this one? I'll wait for just about for a second or two before we move on. Take a look at the map. All right, I'm not seeing any responses yet, so I'm going to move on. Oh, do our notes have to be in a notebook? Because All right, so you weren't here at the beginning. I did talk about that. You don't need to have your specific notebook. You just need to have a way for you to take notes. So if you have extra piece of paper for now, that's fine. There may be a chance for you to go up to Trinity in the next few weeks to grab your stuff. I can't promise that. Just hang tight. We'll let you know if that's possible. So if you're not taking notes right now, that's okay. Just you're gonna have to come back and take a few notes. We're not going to get through a whole lot on and just today, but you need to start thinking about what you're going to do in the interim, whether it's just paper that you can keep together in a stack, or if you want to do it electronically, whatever works for you. You need to start thinking about how that's going to be, what works best. So if you have a strategy for that already, that's great. If not, then you need to start. You need to think about that before Friday. All right. So moving on to the Iron Curtain. So you can see the extent here of the Soviet influence from here in the Baltic all the way down to the Adriatic, like Churchill said. All of these communist nations had fallen under the influence of the Soviet Union working closely together. You can see Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all annexed by the Soviet Union over the course of World War II. Poland under complete influence. And then here you can see East Germany. So something we're going to be talking about in a little bit is how Germany was divided up after World War II. We think back to the Treaty of Versailles and why that didn't work after World War I, why Germany was able to still rise to power not about 20 years later. And the Allies this time decided that far, far more drastic actions had to be taken to ensure that Germany was rebuilt in the right way and they wouldn't be a world threat in another 20 years. So that's what they what they did over the next few years is they divided up Germany. We'll take a look at that a little bit. So communist but unaligned Yugoslavia. So this Iron Curtain, this border here all the way down across much of Europe, and you could see dividing a lot of these Western European countries, which we have a close relationship even to this day. UK, France. Thank you, Hayden. Ireland and Norway, Sweden, Finland versus all of these other Eastern European countries. So the Truman Doctrine, as we were talking about, this Iron Curtain posed a real threat in the minds of a lot of the leaders of the United States, of the UK. So Truman decided he was going to take active action to make sure that stopped spreading. So he was determined to keep Soviet influence contained within its existing boundaries. In 1947, Truman asked Congress for $40 million in aid for Greece and Turkey. With American aid, both countries were able to hold off. That should be off. Let me fix that because I can actually do that very easily in this mode. There you go. Typos, they happen. Hold off communist threats. And we can go back real quick. Don't worry, I'll be back. But you can see down here, Greece and Turkey. It feels like they would be directly in that path of that Iron Curtain, that influence from the Soviet Union, but they were actually able to hold it off due to the Truman Doctrine and the aid that we provided for them in terms of $400 million to help fix their economies. Again, they're struggling economically, and those were the big targets for the USSR to extend that communist influence over those areas and try and incite the people to change the way the government was functioning. So those were the target. That's why Truman chose those two countries to be to receive that aid directly. As he says, the free people of the world look to us for support in maintaining their freedoms. If we falter in our leadership, we may endanger the peace of the world, and we shall surely endanger the welfare of our own nation. 1947. So Truman was determined to help out these countries, partially because he was worried about if the world as a whole was communist, then the United States would not be able to resist that influence in the long term. So Miss Musgrove keeps texting me. Again, I have a chat set up where the USSR is still Stalin. Thank you, Hayden. That's a great question. We have a chat set up on a different thing, so they can talk with me. I know you're. If you want me to invite you to that, I can do that. Sorry. Just gonna have issues like this Sometimes it's going to be a little weird. We'll get used to it. We'll get through it, everybody. I really do appreciate everybody who showed up for the live stream. Anyway, going on. In addition to the Truman Doctrine, we also put forth the Marshall Plan. So Secretary of State at the time, George Marshall, proposed an ambitious plan to help Europe rebuild after the war. So this kind of in addition to the Truman Doctrine, just a little bit more widespread aid. So he actually took a tour of Europe after World War II to try and assess the damage that had been done over the course of this war. And he saw that there were millions of homeless and hungry people throughout the country. There are many, many areas that were completely devastated by battle, by... Why is the U.S. trying to help when we just got out of the war, says Kinsley. I'll get to that in just a second. Good question. So the ultimate goal of the Marshall Plan was to reduce communist revolutions. Between 1948 and 1952, the Marshall Plan provided more than $12 billion in aid to Western European countries. So providing that aid across Europe to really help, again, stave off this communist influence and look to free enterprise, to democracy, to capitalism as the way to rebuild instead of having this communist influence. And that's partially why the United States was trying to help out, is they were trying to show the world that the way to build wealth, the way to best run your country is through capitalism and through that sort of freedom. And it was important that they made sure that their ideology was stronger than the USSR, and the communist countries weren't the ones to help rebuild. Also, we think back to World War I, where we basically didn't help out a lot of countries like Germany rebuild as much as we perhaps should have. So this more direct influence in Europe was an attempt to rebuild in a much better way, a much more longer lasting way than what we tried in World War I. The World War I rebuilding plan, again, just led to World War II because it wasn't either strong enough or lenient enough on Germany, depending on how you look at it. Hayden says, why was Russia being so rude to everyone? They recently went to war against Germany. Russia's thinking the same way. Right? Same with as you say, also with the U.S. Russia's thinking the same way. They want to spread their communist influences across the globe and show the world that that's the way that things should run. If they're working together with all these communist nations, they can thrive together. Again, countries that have similar ideologies in terms of how the economy runs can work together a lot easier. They can trade together. They can have those beneficial relationships, and then hopefully ally together against potential threats. At least that's the idea. So that's why both the United States and the USSR during this Cold War period are going to try and spread as much influence across the globe as they possibly can. And sure, we just went to war against Germany, but that doesn't mean that we hate all of the German people. It is our responsibility to try and help get them back on their feet and neutralizing the threat all the same. We're not letting the same people be in charge, but helping the German people who maybe weren't necessarily directly involved, a lot of the people who may stay at home, just helping them rebuild and be as strong as they possibly can economically so the world as a whole can thrive and we can thrive off of their prosperity as well. And then they're not going to be bitter, resentful like they were last time and then pose a new threat 20 years later. All right, so the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, and what we're going to talk about in a little bit, the Berlin Airlift, were all American efforts to build a non-communist Europe. All of those, that's part of the primary goals behind all of these actions, is to make sure communism doesn't spread and, that capitalism is still the world's strongest form of government. All right, so it's 11 o'clock. We'll go through 2 more slides and we'll call it there for today. So a divided country. So after World War II, as we were kind of talking about, the Allies agreed that Germany needed to be put under strict control as the world recovered. Last time we kind of just, the world imposed a whole bunch of different restrictions on them and forced them to pay, but they were still allowed to more or less govern themselves. And anytime they pushed those boundaries, there was no real repercussions. They decided they had to be way more strict this time. Hayden says, and Russia was also being very selfish because they didn't want to help anyone out and to be the strongest power. Well, they were helping people out as well, but they were doing it in their own way. They were trying to spread that communist influence, and they hoped that the complete revolution, the overhaul of their governments in these different countries were going to be enough to help them out economically. This distribution of wealth, they thought that was the biggest issue. So they're not necessarily being, I mean, they're both the U.S. and the USSR are being selfish in their own ways, but they're trying to, they at least masquerade it with the idea of they're helping countries. So, okay, back to Germany. Being putting under strict control. You had American, so was it communism versus capitalism? That's basically, yeah, that's Cold War for you right there. That's a quick summary. All right. American, British, French, and Soviet troops each occupied a part of Germany. And the capital itself, Berlin, was also divided up among these 4 countries into different districts. And each country put a certain spin of their own influence on each one of the zones. Obviously, the USSR, they decided to, be strict and have this sort of communist regime in their section, while American, British, French all work together to kind of restore this capitalist economy in the rest of Germany. So by 1948, after only about 3 years of occupation, US, Britain, and France wanted to reunite their zones, but Stalin opposed that. He wanted to maintain control. He was worried that Germany was going to be a threat again, or he was just trying to maintain a grip over as much. So that was the Berlin Wall. We'll get to that. So he wanted to maintain as much control over the territory that he could. So he ends up closing off West Berlin to the outside world. So West Berlin was the area that is controlled by the Allies here, the American, British, and French. You can see at this map right here. Don't worry, we'll go back if you didn't get all those notes. But you can see Berlin here is part of Eastern Germany, which is all under Soviet control. I'm going to move myself over here real quick so you can see this key down in the bottom right. You can see that the orange area is controlled by the Soviet Union. We talked about how Poland was more or less under the Soviet Union's control. Percy, don't worry, I'll bring him up before I go off. But you have Berlin here, the capital, which is then divided up as well. So you have this whole area of West Berlin, which is not only bordering East Berlin, but is also completely surrounded by Soviet-controlled territory. So once these relationships between the US, the UK, France, and then the USSR all kind of fracture, West Berlin is more or less cut off from the rest of the world. So the Western Berlin starts to struggle, both in terms of food, economic, money. So what Truman does is he approves this big airlift to be sent over to West Berlin and that continues for quite some time, providing constant supplies to these people who are cut off from much of the world. So the Berlin Wall was ended up being constructed several years later, but what was going on was that the East Germany was much, much poorer than West Germany. There was a lot of people in West Germany who were thriving under capitalism and people in East Germany who were living under a strict regime that they weren't used to even before World War II. And they were trying to flee to West Berlin, to the Allied controlled territories, to be more profitable. Sort of like North Korea. Yeah, in many ways, you're right. And we'll talk about North Korea because there are definitely parallels there later. But in response, the USSR decides to construct the Berlin Wall, dividing Berlin in half. And basically anybody who tries to get over that wall, who tries to escape, was in danger of either being arrested or just shot on sight. So again, put under this extremely, extremely strict government control from the USSR. Just one of these hot areas of this Cold War. I know it's kind of weird saying that like that, but one of the biggest areas of attention globally during this time was Berlin. as the United States and other allies are continually trying to provide the support, while the USSR is trying to maintain control over the areas that they have. So again, looking at this map, you can see how that's divided. And what ends up happening is the British, France, and U.S. Areas all kind of end up uniting in what was called West Germany for a long time, while East Germany still was its own area over in the Berlin part. So I think that's where we're going to call it for today. I know it was short. Usually it's going to be a little bit longer. Are there any additional questions for me before I get off? I hope this worked out really well for you guys. I hope if you're watching it, the recording, that this is not too confusing. I know my constant interaction with chat is going to be a little bit weird. That's why it's important, if you can, to catch the live streams. Allows a little bit more interaction that way. In the future, the Pixel Bob looks like, yeah, that you're not wrong there, Hayden. Okay, sorry, off track. So I'll catch everybody later on. I'll catch everybody later on at 1:30. We'll be on for there, so I can talk with you a little bit more directly. You can let me know what you thought about everything, if the setup worked really well, or if it was, there could have been stuff that I did better. Let me know. And then we'll do this again on Friday if everything works out. Maybe we'll change up some things. Just stay tuned. Missed the Truman Doctrine slide. Can I go back, Natalie? Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you for asking. Will you raid another streamer, Dakota? No, I'm not going to do that. If you guys want to do something, I don't care, but I'm not going to do an actual raid. So sorry. Anyway, sorry. Can I ever bring my dog to school? Alyssa, are these going to be both history days? Friday we'll do history again. Will this live stream be at 10:30 or different time? I'm going to try and do it at 10:30 every day that we have history. So not tomorrow, since we don't have history tomorrow. But it will be every day that we have history at 10:30 is my goal. Am I going to post the notes on Google Classroom? I will, Daniel, but it's probably going to be a little bit before I get it on there, because I do want to emphasize actually getting on and watching the streams, because again, I may ask questions that will be part of your assignment, and there's no way for you to catch that unless you are actually watching either the videos or the live stream with us. So what days are history? Well, this week they're Wednesday and Friday. So I'll be doing this again on Friday. Next week, we'll see. Just stay tuned for those announcements. We're still getting updates just like you are. Any other questions did I miss? All right. I think we're good there. So I'm going to cut off the recording now. So.